to Energy Vista, a podcast on energy issues. I'm your host, Leslie Palti-Guzman. In each episode of this podcast, we will chat with energy experts from all around the world. They will tell us about their passion, inspiration, and aspiration. It's December 7, 2018, and time for a new Energy Vista episode. Today, I'm exchanging with Marc-Antoine Eyl-Mazzega, who is director of Ifri, a Center for Energy. Previously, he worked at the International Energy Agency and at the Robert Schuman Foundation. Marc-Antoine lives in Paris, and he is a French and German national. Hi, Marc-Antoine. I'm very excited to chat with you today because a lot is going on. There is the United Nations Climate Conference Cop24, which is happening this week in Poland. And you co-authored an op-ed last week in Le Monde advocating for a French-German alliance on climate. And you will tell us more about it later in the podcast, as well as you're witnessing even more than us, since you're in Paris, the yellow vest, yellow jacket movement, which is really making a dent on Macron's politics right now and desire to move towards energy transition in France. So we'll discuss all this and let's delve right into it. So ahead of the COP24, various reports and media have published numbers and assessment of where each country stands in abiding by their pledge to reduce carbon emissions. Which countries so increase, which countries so decrease, which one are in the right direction, which one are reversing their initial engagement. Can you tell us a little bit more about where do we stand today, and what do you see critically as challenge, as a big challenge in moving towards a lower carbon world?
We are witnessing a rise of CO2 emissions. It was the case in 2017. It will be the case in 2018. And one of the reasons for that is that coal is coming back. It's coming back. It's coming back in China. It's coming back in India. It's coming back in a number of emerging economies. And that is driving up CO2 emissions alongside the transport sector, of course.
And when you say it's coming back, are you mostly thinking about emerging markets, China, India, and South Asia, or also Europe and the US?
No, it's mainly in Asia. The story is mainly about Asia because we've seen, of course, there is the surge in electricity demand, and there is all the new capacities that had been in the pipeline to become operational and which are being switched on. And there is the fact that we've actually seen some higher gas prices in past months, and this is making coal more attractive again. So we are very far from the peak and the decline in coal demand that we need to see in order to be in a Paris compliant trajectory, I would say. The second element is that we have now experienced 4 years of record high temperatures. And I mean, this is from in a historical perspective.
Yeah.
The last 4 years, and every year we've broken another record in the increase of temperatures. So that also should be extremely worrisome, I think. And we've seen an acceleration in the number and in the magnitude of climate disasters. And you are in the US. I mean, the forest fires or the different storms, etc., that we have experienced, or the droughts, or the forest fires in Scandinavia and Europe this summer. I mean, all that are part of a larger chain of climate disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, of course, something new for us here. But if you go to Sahel in Africa or in these regions, people are already experiencing these much hotter temperatures and the chaos that this leads to for a number of years already, right?
Yeah.
The third aspect is that we are now in a climate leadership crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And that is unprecedented from the south of the United States. So formally, the US is still in until the end of next year, but so they're participating in the negotiation, etc. But of course, the signal that this is giving is very bad. Now you have Brazil, whose new president is also calling the agreement into question. We have a number of countries that have an ambiguous stance. So, for example, you have South Korea that has put more coal in its electricity generation this year. You have Japan that will miss out its climate targets. You have Australia that will miss out its climate target and that will develop further coal. So here, very clearly, I think countries turn back to their national interest, their short-term summited national interest, in forgetting how hard and expensive it will be in the longer term if no serious climate action is undertaken on their side.
Yeah. And you seem critical also about the EU's efforts so far in dealing with climate change. I mean, we saw some French leadership over the years, but what do you think happened? Is there a reversal of trends? And we see that Macron is also challenged at home with this movement of the yellow vest, and globally, making sure that the most vulnerable are not left out from this energy transition is increasingly going to become a problem because there are huge inequalities in populations, and not everybody can afford an electrical car or a solar panel on the roof.
Absolutely, you're pretty right. So in Europe, this leadership crisis is also unfolding at different levels. So the first aspect of that is Germany. Germany has a coal commission that is working to lay out a plan to progressively reduce the share of coal in its electricity generation, and that commission has postponed its conclusions for 3 months. It's been working for over 5 months now, and the problem is that there is no political will and determination to phase out coal in one of Europe's richest economies.
So that's interesting because maybe you can just make a parenthesis and explain our audience what happened with Germany phasing out from nuclear is that they made a big shift towards more renewable, but also towards more coal. And now I think the share of coal in the country's power mix is around 36%. While there is not much gas being used,
Yeah, exactly. The German Energiewende, the energy turn or transformation, is not a move to reduce CO2 emissions. It is a move away from nuclear primarily, and that's basically where it is. So what the Germans have done is that they have put for over 200 billion euros renewable energy capacity into the electricity system to the amount of over 100 gigawatts, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, in order to balance that, and in order to compensate for the declining role of nuclear, well, coal has been actually maintained at the level that you mentioned, at around 36%, so that actually the level of Germany's CO2 emissions has remained constantly high. And moreover, at the same time, the German transport sector has actually dramatically seen a rise in emissions at the same time. So the German energy transformation is a disaster from a climate point of view. And this is exactly what we have with a colleague recently put forward, and hence our appeal to a French-German climate union. Why that? Because the Germans have to take the responsibility. They have a budget surplus. They can invest into transforming the coal mining regions, etc., into other activities and taking care of the jobs, etc. They can do it, but that requires political courage and determination and leadership, which is absent in Germany. And that is not to say the problem is easy to solve. No, it's not. But it can be solved, especially by a country that, well, I have to remember, 20 years ago, reunified with a country that probably was as authoritarian than some between Turkmenistan and North Korea. So that has to be kept in mind, right?
So, but Germany has a very strong environmental movement that was driven mostly by anti-nuclear sentiment. But by 2020, Angela Merkel won't be in power anymore. What do you think is going to be, how is this crisis is going to be solved?
Well, it will require a country, a nationwide consensus on the need to plan for large social transfers, for large territorial transfers, and that is exactly the point that you were mentioning just a few minutes before. We are now in a situation where we have started to deepen this energy transformation, and the key for success will be to organize a fair and effective redistribution between those who pollute and emit lots and those who do not, those who have the money, etc., and to avoid exactly that, the weaker, the more vulnerable actually suffer much more because of this energy transformation. And just a few words on France, because you mentioned the Yellow Vest movement, which has shocked us all.
Yeah.
But what lies behind that? Behind that lies a good fiscal policy, which is that the French government decided that we will progressively raise the carbon taxation on gasoline to up to over 100 euro per ton of CO2, which means that the gasoline prices were constantly increasing, irrelevant of what is the global market situation. Right?
Yeah. So just to put this into context, because for the Americans, they don't necessarily know how more expensive is gasoline in Europe and how it's more expensive to drive a car in general because fuel prices are already more expensive. So we're talking of how much increase and how affordable or not affordable it is for like the people that are in the lower income of the society.
Sure. To give you an idea, the carbon tax component plus two other taxes make out around 80% of the final price of gasoline here. And so if you put a liter of gasoline into your car at the filling station, it will cost you around €1.50, €1.60 currently. But within that tax component, over the next 4 to 5 years, the plan was to raise the carbon price 5 times. That's basically to increase the tax component 5 times.
Yeah.
So, and that is exactly the right fiscal policy that you need if you want to progressively make the use of heavy emitting fuels more expensive in order to give incentives for people to use other fuels or to switch to other ways of transportation, etc. But the problem in France was that exactly that incentivization policy, that support policy to move to other fuels, to move to other modes of transportation, it has been totally absent or insufficient. And this is exactly how this crisis popped up. Because it is a fundamental crisis that is related to this, because the transfer and the gain that you make on the other hand has not been visible at all. And actually a lot of these additional revenues were used to finance other measures and completely unrelated to it.
So you think that a better approach would have been to start first with like making available all those alternative means of mobility and alternative fuels and so on for people to use less cars, and then go ahead with a new fiscality to disincentivize the use of gasoline. Yeah.
Absolutely. But the problem is that this is a 15 or 20 years policy that we're talking about, which means putting new train lines, reopening train stations in this towns and in this village, which means having a real public transportation scheme in place in the provinces, in the rural areas, which is totally, but largely inappropriate currently in order to address these challenges. So this is the thing. The other aspect that relates particularly to the big protest movement and to the violent movement European experiences is that actually this has triggered and catalyzed a number of protests, a number of demands on the government, a number of frustrations that are actually not all related to energy. Because, for example, people protest the fact that the average driving speed has been reduced from 90 to 80 kilometers per hour on the local street level, the rural areas, etc. So all this has gathered has been aggregated into this protest movement.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, as you said, the fundamental issue that we have to address is how to ensure that there is a territorial cohesion, that those regions where you have the coal industry, etc., are not suffering more than others and are being supported as they will progressively take the coal, for example. And also with the vulnerable customers. That's fundamental. And so our call for a French-German climate union starts from the following assumption. No major progress in the construction, in the history of the European Union, has been achieved without a strong French and German cooperation, coordination, shared goals, shared objectives, etc. And in the field of energy, our two countries are increasingly drifting apart, be it from the energy mix, be it from the policy, and this is very concerning because you cannot have a functioning climate policy, you cannot have a functioning EU energy policy if France and Germany are further drifting apart.
Yeah. And today, is there a European-wide initiative to accelerate the closure of coal plants, or it's left to national regulators and politics?
No, it is an entirely national issue because the EU has no competence over its member countries' energy mix. This is a fully sovereign issue.
Yeah.
But there are a number of countries as part of the latest One Climate Summit that have pledged to phase out coal between, say, now and 2025. And that includes France, that includes the Netherlands and Belgium. And so these countries represent roughly 40 gigawatts. That means around 1/4, 25% of the installed coal fleet that we still have in Europe. Now, here one has to say that the UK has set the right example because they have introduced a carbon floor price, a carbon tax, basically, on the power generation sector. And within a few months, the share of coal in the electricity mix dramatically reduced. And they reduced within a few months 80 terawatt hours of coal. That is immense.
Yeah.
And that was replaced partly with the gas, which is good, partly with renewables, partly with energy efficiency, partly with imports, and also partly offset by the fact that you had some lower GDP growth. So that shows that you can do it in a major industrialized economy.
Yeah, and definitely it's a tough balance, and also as we saw in the US, that we saw since Trump was elected and being friendly to a base where there is coal industry, you need to be careful in doing it in the right way, not to drive more populism or not to widen the gap within the society between frustrations, inequalities, and all this. And energy is in the middle of that. Yeah.
But it also means that you cannot handle, if you want to do a deep decarbonization of your energy system, it requires a fundamental economic transformation so that you cannot just leave energy policy as part of one among 10 or 15 policy areas and to keep it separate from the other areas. You have to put this at the backbone of your policies, at the center of your policies, and all the other policies will derive from that.
Yeah.
And that is the other major gap and missing point that we have, which is that in France, for example, which claims to be a climate leader, etc., energy is just one ministry among others, and there's no clear prioritization and understanding actually of that.
Yeah, well, Marc-Antoine, maybe you have a future in the government, but I definitely agree. Like with what you said, and maybe we need more people inside governments that are more aware and informed about energy issues and better trained to deal with the energy transition. Totally. So that's a good segue to our next segment, which is about your professional trajectory. So you are in the academic research think tank world, and you have a PhD. So was it like a clear path for you to go in those institutions?
It was, I would say, it started from the very early times of my higher studies, when I kind of understood that, I like analyzing developments, I like providing advice, and I like trying to understand complex issues, and not being in kind of more operational, more day-to-day, short-sighted operations or activities. And so indeed I decided early on not to enter professional masters, for example, but rather to do a research master's and then to do a PhD dissertation, which in France is not very well seen in a way, because in Germany it's very prestigious, the US I guess as well, but not so much here, because one considers that you have basically spent 4 years in the library in complete disconnect to reality.
Right.
So to avoid that, I choose a topic which I quite rightly, I think, identified, well, of course, being modest, but you will understand why, because I chose to work on Ukraine's gas policy sector and understand why actually the 2006 gas crisis happened.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough that 3 years after that gas crisis, another gas crisis happened, which put me at the forefront of a very hot topical and important issue. And so my PhD research had a huge immediate analytical value for policymakers, for industry players, for journalists, media, and that was fantastic. And that, in that sense, my PhD was not at all boring or was not at all spent in the library, but
it was very timely.
Exactly. And so it was a fascinating time, and this is how I got also into the natural gas industry, understanding its fundamentals, its issues, etc. So it was a great learning period.
Yeah, great. And I think, like me, like you got attracted on energy issues through political science and international affairs.
Exactly.
So I'm asking many women that I'm talking to how they combine work-life balance, but I think that's also a question we should ask men. And I'm wondering, do you think in academia, think tanks, it's easier? Is it more relaxed, or it's the same kind of pressure or deadlines that you can find in corporate, and you're traveling? So how do you combine everything?
Well, thanks for that question. Actually, yes, I have to kick myself.
Yeah.
And I must admit that Shoah, what it gives you is obviously more flexibility, in the sense that you can manage your weekly workload. You're working very autonomously, very independently. So you can basically organize your week. You can decide that you work more during the weekends, and in order, for example, to make up some free times to pick up the kids from the nanny or just at school, and spend maybe an hour with them, having dinner, putting them to bed, and then work another 2 hours, So this you can do very easily, or I guess more easily than in many other professions. When you follow the stock market, you have to be there when it opens, and you have to be there when it closes, right? You can't really do it differently. So So that is one aspect. The second aspect is that there is a lot of pressure. You need to deliver. You are constantly being asked to participate, to intervene here, to provide an analysis there. Something happens in the world, journalists call you and wants an analysis. So there is a lot of work that comes onto you, and you have to manage that, and to, of course, to keep the priorities, to continue your research, and at the same time manage your team. So, it is demanding, but definitely, I think to match this with family life, it requires some flexibility, but it opens some good opportunities, I think, for good and reasonable balance in seeing the family and leading this important work.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the problem is when you have a lot of travel engagements abroad, and so what I have indeed been doing is that I try to avoid long-haul flights, long-distance transcontinental, trips, because it takes too long, and you are and it makes you exhausted after. So I try to avoid that. I try to limit my various trips to in and around Europe, I should say, and try to keep them as short as possible. And that will change in the next couple of years, when the kids grow up, certainly. But in the meantime, I prefer to focus on that. I'm sure I'm missing a lot, but that's a choice.
Exactly. Yeah. We all need to make some choices and select our priorities. Yeah.
Yes.
Very interesting. And more on a personal level, I wanted to ask you, each time I'm seeing a biography about you, you're mentioned as a German French national. So I guess 2 languages, 2 cultures, at least. So how did it serve you? How did it inform your work, your analysis? Tell us a little bit, how is it for you to have this enrich cultures?
Well, for me, it is. I think it's been always, all through my studies and then my career, a huge change, actually, because it opened me, of course, to this immense culture on the other side of the Rhine. I studied in Berlin. My first big boss was a German at the International Energy Agency, and the fact that he was German, the fact that I was half German, I think also helped to establish a specific relationship, which, of course, we would maybe not have the same if I were only French or only Italian or whatever. Then I think, especially when working in the field of energy, in Europe, a lot is about France and Germany. So in a way, I feel privileged because I think I have a good and deep understanding of what's happening in Germany. I understand the specificities. But the same for France. So when, for example, they go apart, like as I mentioned in energy policy, I also feel I have a special responsibility here and legitimacy, actually, to also criticize what's happening in Germany or in France without being accused of doing German bashing as a French or vice versa, right? So I think it's a great change, but it also comes with new responsibilities, especially in the times that we are now facing.
What do you mean by that?
Because we need, as I mentioned earlier on, I mean, with the climate change threat, with the threat that we are facing with the rise of populism in Europe, with the many energy sector challenges that we are facing and who are extremely complex. Because, I mean, the energy sectors, with the digital revolution, with the growing role of renewables, with the interconnections among countries, I mean, all becomes much more complex, and one has to do the right choices now, because this is about our future, right?
Yeah. So you feel you have to become more engaged, maybe, and more. I mean, let know your opinions, right?
Yes, well, yes, and in 2 ways, certainly. The first is to provide more and better quality analysis on these very important issues.
Yeah, to inform and educate, like people that are not, on a regular basis looking at things that we're looking at.
Absolutely, absolutely. But also to inform the decision makers and the stakeholders and companies, etc. And always try to challenge views or to provide different views, and I think that's very important.
Yeah.
And then, as you said, yes, I think we need to share more our ideas. We need to discuss them more, and we try at the same time. It's our role, right? Mm-hmm. So we try to do this as much as possible.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, Marc-Antoine, thank you so much. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners have too. And we'll be, I'm sure you'll be back as a guest in a couple of months or next year.
I hope so. And it was great talking to you, Leslie, and thanks for your initiative, and would be very, very pleased to follow up later on then.
Great. Thanks. Bye. That concludes our Energy Vista podcast, which was recorded on December 7, 2018. Our theme music is provided by Music Screen, licensed under Creative Commons. This is Leslie Palti-Guzman saying good day and good luck.